Today I'm joined by Titania from Epicura Life, who's making Vitality Seed Crunches for food toppers. Titania, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
So, first of all, can you tell me what is a Vitality Seed Crunch?
It is a organic activated seed granola, which is basically a salad topper. So it's savory. I've also developed a sweet version, so it can go on breakfast and it can go on lunch and dinner. Um, so the seeds are germinated, so there is no anti-nutrients involved, and then it's dehydrated at very low heat, so the seed oils are not harmed in any way. And yeah, it adds a delicious crunch and extra plant protein to your meal.
That sounds amazing. And also, it's interesting, I've not really heard of a savory granola before.
Yeah, it's fairly new to the market. I think it's kind of developed on that granola only goes on yogurt and fruit, where why can't seeds go on your vegetables and your salad?
From my basic knowledge of granola, you usually get clusters held together by some kind of a sweetener like honey or maple syrup or sugar or something. But are you able to get clusters in the savory granolas?
Yes, because I use flax seeds, and I'm careful not to germinate the flax seeds. It's a special process, but I don't germinate the flax seeds too much. Otherwise, it would become almost like a cracker. So it's kind of a delicate process where it kind of creates a gel once it gets wet, and it will actually cluster in certain areas if you do it in the right way. My secret.
You mentioned anti-nutrient, but what is that? Because it sounds to me like anti-nutrient sounds like it would be a bad thing, but it must be a good thing, I'm guessing.
Well, actually, what a seed does is when it goes into the ground and it's planted, in order to protect itself from, anything that could harm it while it's growing into a plant, it creates something called anti-nutrients. And unfortunately, which is a good thing because otherwise it wouldn't grow into the tree that it's supposed to be or the plants it's supposed to be, etc. But when it goes into our bodies, it does the same thing. So by germinating it, it thinks actually that it's safe and it's away from its predators, and so the anti-nutrients are released, right? And it's fine to grow. When you soak it, when you germinate it or activate it, all the same terminology. These anti-nutrients are released, and then the nutrients inside the seed can better be absorbed by your body.
Is that phytic acid? Is that part of it?
I wouldn't know.
No.
I don't
Okay.
know the scientific terminology of the actual anti-nutrients themselves, but um, yeah, if you just eat a plain seed, for example, that hasn't been germinated and maybe even toasted, um, you probably absorb a lot less than if you had, just because it's protected the way it would be in nature.
I was speaking to someone who activates nuts recently, and
Right.
they were saying how the nut kind of protects itself from being eaten.
Yeah, it's the same thing with a seed.
Yeah, and so it can be harmful if you eat it in that state.
Yeah.
I guess in the old days, we might have just taken nuts straight from the tree or the bush, and maybe it's the same with seeds. So would there been, would that be the best state to have it, or does it actually, is it even better to germinate it?
It's always better to soak your nuts and seeds because you're getting rid of the anti-nutrients, but you're still getting some nutrition. It's just a better form of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think the problem with nuts and seeds is that, um, it also tastes a lot better if you toast them. But the problem is when you toast them, the seed oils are very fragile, very delicate. And so when you toast them, um, it changes the structure of the seed or nut itself, and then it's not as good for you. It can actually be harmful. So but the thing is when you just eat a nut or a seed on its own, especially if it's been germinated, it's a bit soft. So you lose that appeal, right? And it doesn't, like you toast even a coriander seed, for example, the difference between a crushed coriander seed raw and a crushed toasted coriander seed is like unbelievable deliciousness factors, right? And it's very similar to all nuts and seeds. So with dehydration, you can then take away that moisture that you've kind of created by the germination process. So you still at least get that crunch, right? But then if you're dehydrating at a very low level of heat, you're not harming the structure of that oil.
There's a lot of talk about seed oils at the moment. Lots of people talk about how bad they are, but I feel like instinctively, if they're not extracted using industrial processes, if it's like cold pressed, then I always imagine it must be good for you. Is
Of
that,
course, yeah, they're
yeah,
full of nutrients. It just needs to be cold pressed, first pressed, high quality seeds as well. I mean, that's another thing about seeds is they do, you need to always lean more towards an organic or high quality type of seed because it's the soil that we're most concerned about right now. And the state of our soils are in very poor condition because of so much, you know, fertilization and all that good stuff. So I think, yeah, it's really important to have very high quality seed oil.
on the subject of soil, it's something that really fascinates me at the moment because I've seen some documentaries recently, like 6 inches of soil. And there was a Dutch one called Planet Soil as well. And there's so much life in good soil. It's actually
Yes. Yeah.
almost terrifying. I used to have this idea that to grow crops, you just need water and sunshine, but actually, you really got to feed the soil. And I think that's the missing piece that we're never really told about that.
Well, and water, right? The quality of the water, which is also becoming, you know, but I think the thing is, if you think about a tomato that comes in soil, that's grown in soil, that's eaten in summer, that is in the origins of where tomatoes came from. So we're talking like say Mexico in July, right? That is going to be the most delicious tomato you've ever eaten in your life, right? But then if you plant that same tomato into a greenhouse in different soil and it's midwinter and say, I don't know, somewhere in the UK, it just doesn't have that same taste or nutrients, right? So it's really important, um, you know, what the food is actually grown in, you know.
Yeah, yeah. How did you get into all of this? Because it sounds like you really care about the nutritional value of what you're making.
I've always had like a deep passion for food and nutrition and the environment and sustainability. It's just always been like, even as a really young person, I've just always been kind of, I think my parents were kind of hippies and my mom was always, very plant forward, had a garden, that kind of thing. And I think it just instilled in me as I, you know, became an adult to eat in that way. And especially, I think being American and aware of how incredibly horrible our soil is, our food systems are, the aggressiveness of a lot of these, seed companies and stuff like that. It really made me quite political about it. I mean, because food is ultimately political, you know.
Yeah, I think that is definitely not talked about enough. One of the problems with GM food is we don't really know enough about the science, although I'm very skeptical about the scientific value. But I think it's the political side that's the really scary part because the power that the companies have that are supplying these seeds are just crippling the industry and the farmers.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of the reasons why we have certain politicians, not to mention any names, in power, is because of these, these kinds of companies. I mean, I mean, the food system literally, partially runs our world on top of obviously fuel, but I mean, we all have to eat, and people want to, and how we eat is then fueled by the fuel, right? So they're very much hand in hand, and I don't think people pay enough attention to that. A lot of these native seeds are then taken from the farmers and by these big food companies and stuff like that, and then the farmers no longer own their seeds. It's really out of control, down to the seed banks, and the fertilizers used on those. And then what happens, they take the seeds, they mess around with the seeds that the farmers would use, um, and then these farmers then have to actually buy the fertilizers to protect the seeds. I mean, it can get really nasty, but
Yeah.
that's maybe another conversation.
Yeah. It's such a big conversation. There was some documentary I started watching recently that was a sequel but about the food industry, but it was so disturbing. I couldn't even finish it because it was talking about the amount of chemicals that you need to keep squeezing out growth from the ground, and then the connection to the lobbyists. The
Oh, okay, right.
lobbyists.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my God. Yeah, the
Yeah.
connection with the lobbyists and
And that's
the
also related to nutrition too. Like, I mean, they will hire registered nutritionists to lobby for them and say that certain things are especially in America that, that are good for you because that's with all these nutrition trends and all this kind of stuff and supplements is also like the Wild West because it's not regulated. So you'll have a lot of, health coaches and stuff like that, sort of, being paid health coach influencers, even worse. And then they're paid by some, brand to promote a health trend that's not even really valid or might it's maybe valid for a tiny percentage of the population, but obviously not for everybody on Instagram.
yeah.
So, it's a whole it's very political, and you have to be really careful and it's I think it's really growingly it's becoming more and more difficult for the consumer to sort of navigate a healthy path because it's just so much conflicting messages and can be very confusing and I think particularly in America. I think it's a little bit better in Europe and the UK. um,
I mean, I'm very happy to hear you say that, but I just don't know how much evidence there is for it. But I'm going to trust your opinion more than mine for
it
sure.
it is. I mean, I'm always really impressed how seasonal Waitrose. I know Waitrose is quite posh, but Waitrose is unbelievably seasonal. I mean, I was just in there yesterday and they had fresh British asparagus. I was like, wow, that's amazing. They sell like wild garlic in March. You would never see that like in Whole Foods in New York City. I mean, they don't even know what seasonal is, right? But the British automatically kind of know because it's still within their culture. I mean, obviously Europe is even more so, but it's definitely, we know that our asparagus is amazing in March. Generally, I would say at least 6% of us, out of or six out of 10 of us, sorry, know that you know what goes what and what to eat when, and kind of it's yeah, I'd say it's a much healthier idea of seasonality in the
Yeah.
UK, from my perspective, anyway.
Well, I'm very glad to hear you say that, but I still struggle to get my head around how bad it must be in the US then, because my
Oh,
experience is there is great food in the US if you really look for it. But there have been times when I found myself in the middle of nowhere in Florida or California, and
yeah.
yeah, it, yeah, everything's either fried or what a salad is. Yeah, there might be 10 different salads on the menu, but they're all basically iceberg lettuce, and you get a tub of some dressing, and that's the difference between the salads.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, the US is it's very much the top percentage of the wealth gets to eat really healthy, from fresh markets and nice restaurants and stuff, but it's still not seasonal though. They're just not a seasonal, in New York you can eat 24 hours and whatever you want from any cuisine, and it's going to be absolutely amazing and delicious because everything's flown in, everything's at your fingertips. But that's not really good for your health. You're so extracted from what reality is, and it's not good for the environment either. I mean, on top of everything else.
When I was younger, probably out of school, there was this big thing about blueberries being a superfood. And I think the idea was you could just have a normal diet or have your normal diet and eat a handful of blueberries every so often, and that would make you healthy, which I kind of think is a bit misleading because that would mean you could eat Pop-Tarts and Findus crispy pancakes. But actually, the older I've got, I feel like it's a much more holistic thing, and it's not that there are good and bad foods necessarily. Like an iceberg lettuce might look like it has no nutritional value, but probably eaten together with blueberries and with brassicas, kale and cabbage and that kind of thing, then that's probably healthy. And I don't know where that idea comes from that just one ingredient is able to be the thing that will get you over the line in terms of health.
Well, it goes back to what I was talking about with food trends, and first of all, there's no such thing as a superfood. That's a food trend, and that's been coined by the corporation making the blueberries that's been imported to the UK from Mexico to sell for that company. What it's a branding thing. You know, all foods are superfoods, really. Um, it's just, again, it goes back to eating them in season, eating them out of good soil, you know, organic if possible, just going back to kind of that whole cycle of life, and I think touching on food combining is really important. I mean, if you eat, if you take certain supplements with other supplements, you're going to absorb them better. Like they all kind of, and what's interesting, again, going back to seasonality, if you eat, foods that nature is giving us in season, then it naturally goes in the flow with each other and they all work together. Like, for example, now is spring equinox, and so we have all of these detoxifying foods like the alliums, like leeks, garlic, and then we've got asparagus. Eating all of that and say a nice pie, for example, it's very cleansing and detoxifying for your system. It cleans out your blood, et cetera, et cetera. But so the earth is also detoxifying at the same time. So eating with all of that in tandem is really important for our health, the planet's health, but also, you wouldn't separate out a leek and just eat leeks. You would eat them, all together, that came from your spring garden, so to speak. So if you shop that way and plan your recipes that way, you don't even have to really do that much research.
So obviously you've got a nutritional background. Is that what you've learned over the years, is how the system works and how we can eat for the best for our health?
Yeah, well, I have a combined education in food politics or sustainability. So I'm quite interested in that, and I like to kind of work with that within, the health of our bodies. So I try to sort of think about both of them together, I would say. Yeah, I'm a registered a nutritional therapist, but I'm also a chef. So I kind of even though there are a few different hats, they're sort of, for me, all the same thing. They're all equally very important, for overall health. You have to think of you can't think about one without the other, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. And do you bring all that knowledge to the Vitality Seed Crunchers?
I think as a brand, as an overall brand for Epicure Life, anything that I kind of do, I would like for that to be a part of the philosophy. I wouldn't create a product or do one of the meal kits without that in mind.
When I did Zoe, was it a year or two ago or something? One of the things that I questioned was when you look into it, I think they make out it's very tailor-made to each individual, but I got the sense that actually it wasn't really. Things might have moved on since then. But do you think with nutrition it has to be tailor-made to the person, or is there are there things that you can say, oh no, everyone eat this and it will definitely help?
I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. Again, it's not just it's just not the person. It's also, where is that person located? What is the environmental stress factors within that location? But there's also factors like, what is the family history of that person? What is the DNA of that person? I mean, you can go quite deep and get very personalized. But if you're looking at a very general picture, which I think is what Zoe does, then it can be helpful. I mean, it's more helpful than someone just Googling how to do stuff. So I think we're advancing, and I think Zoe is pioneering that chapter, and I'm sure, I've seen their seeds, and they don't germinate them, they don't taste very good, and I think, but still at the same time, I'm really happy to have that in the market because it's for the better good, right? And I think, we all need to try to do that as food brands, is to really think about what we're giving people and making sure that it's good for their health, and take that responsibility on. So I'm actually going to go see the documentary. I got invited to see their documentary in like a month.
Which documentary is that?
It's a Zoe documentary about how it transformed people's health. They interview some clients or something like that, and yeah. That's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, amazing. I can't wait to see that. I saw they had a TV show. I think they followed four couples around or something. Yeah, it was extraordinary, the transformation. These people who are usually overweight, and when Tim Spector and the nutritionist open up the cupboards, they're just filled with ultra-processed foods. And
Yeah.
then in the process of 6 weeks, the cameras come back and they go, "Wow, this, I had no idea that kefir was so delicious. And who knew I don't need to drink wine? Kombucha is just amazing." So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a rapid turnaround. Oh, and they all lose enormous amounts of weight and their biological age drops right down. And that's just in a few weeks.
Yeah, I know it's amazing how, but even some people that are in relatively healthy, um, positioning, like they tend to eat. They tend to eat. You have people on the other end of the spectrum where you have people that are, they say they're terrified of food too. So they don't eat any gluten. They don't eat any. They don't eat any nuts for some reason. They don't eat because it's too fattening. They don't eat any, and so you have people that are super, quote unquote healthy, but are on the other extreme. It's like left and right politics, and they both end up being really unhealthy.
When you work with people as a nutritionist, so when you're working one to one, do you ever find that they do have a problem with gluten, but then you train them to eat in a certain way that actually it means it's not a problem? Or not
Well,
just gluten, anything.
yeah, I think that's actually a deeper question because I think, especially in modern life, we have so many stress factors to deal with, and nobody's childhood is perfect, and your parents' childhoods weren't perfect, and so on. So you kind of have this inherent stress all the time, and then you reach your early 30s, and you're just exhausted. You're starting to get forms of disease, and your body is it's not really performing the way it should, but you're so-called healthy, right? But I think a lot of that is just because your body's just, your adrenals are exhausted, and what happens is when your adrenals are exhausted, giving you little symptoms, little red flags. So you get histamine issues, so you become intolerant to usually foods that you've been eating every day, particularly because your body says, listen, I need more than this. Like, you can't just eat blueberries every day for breakfast. You need to give me nuts and seeds and carbohydrates and sweet potatoes and everything else, right? So I think, yeah, I think we get kind of caught up in um, this idea that we're eating healthy, but then in the end, we're not eating enough of the healthy foods. We're too focused on what the media tells us, what you know um, food brands tell us, stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of the intolerances, I really think that you can, if you stop eating blueberries every day, for example, and you switch your food around, you start, going back to the eat the rainbow idea, um, and you relieve some of the stress out of your life, the intolerances and your histamines, the allergies, they clear up naturally. So you can, I mean, you might have an allergy to dairy and you can never eat dairy your whole life, but if you have a piece of bread every now and then and you have a mild gluten intolerance, it's probably okay after you get your adrenals into a better state. It's just, the consistently eating the same thing every day, your body will eventually become intolerant to it. It's just inevitable.
Yeah. My girlfriend's a Virgo and she can happily just sit at her laptop just working like crazy. And she even breathes really intensely when she's working. And then she'll go straight into, she'll sort of slip the laptop away and then just start eating and wolfing it down. And I kind of wonder if maybe some of the struggle she has with digestion, it might be good if she just takes a few breaths before, separating the two and just allowing some blood to flow properly again. And so it's possible that whatever someone in that state would eat would be problematic. And it's not just about the food.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies about and research about how, eating calmly, saying a prayer or being respectful of the food you eat, you absorb it better, you digest it better. That's really big in Ayurvedics, in fact. It's about, just sort of, allowing it to come in and your body, letting it nourish you. And if you eat rapidly, it's very stressful. Obviously it's going to affect your stomach acid and how you process that food in your system and so on and so forth. So there's definitely, it seems quite basic, but for sure, it's there's a lot to that.
Yeah. When I was at working in an office still, there was a French woman who came in and sat next to me and said, "Wait, that's not your lunch, is it? You're not going to eat lunch at your desk." And I think culturally for the French, and I'm sure other countries apart from us, you would never just have lunch at your desk. You'd take some steps out, you'd probably have a social with eating with someone else as well.
Yeah, definitely. My partner is Italian, and he has to go to the office a couple of times a week. But it's very funny because when he does eat lunch, he goes and gets whatever he's going to eat, and they have a roof deck, and he goes up there and sits on a bench, and he calls me, and he's like, typical Italian, sitting in the sun, like eating his lunch, relaxing.
Yeah.
Which is what we should all do. We have to take a minute to, enjoy our food. There's something to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How did it all begin then with Epicura Life? Are you doing nutrition for people or were you private chefing?
Yeah, so I started private chefing about 13 or so years ago. Um, and yeah, I'd always been focused with, food and healing. And all my clients were sort of geared toward that. My very first client was kind of based on FODMAPs before that was really a thing. He had a huge gut problem, and we managed to get him over that, and that really fascinated me. And so, I then went on to work for a very famous footballer for Tottenham, and he was lovely, and then he was very focused on sort of obviously training food for high performance and stuff like that. So, and then I realized that I really needed to go and study it on a deeper level. So I took a culinary nutrition course at Leeds, and then I went on to study at School of Health and did an advanced nutrition degree. Um, and I'm actually currently in an ND program with the same school. And so I'll finish that in probably about 3 years. I've just kind of halfway through that program. So I just finished up the Ayurvedic portion, and now I'm just starting to study Chinese medicine. So, yeah, and then I took a master's degree in food politics as well.
Okay, so you care deeply about the industry then. That's amazing.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think now the new things to learn is like really how to build a brand strategy, all that stuff. But coming from a fashion background, interestingly enough, I really love it. I love designing the package, understanding the market, the person eating the food. I love all that, kind of building the brand idea of it. It's very important to me for it to look beautiful, to sort of um, to have a kind of image around it as well. So that's going to be um, an interesting chapter.
Yeah. So you were doing the education piece, you were doing the chef piece, obviously learning about nutrition at the time. And then is that when you thought the Vitality Seeds should come in?
I was making these kind of salad toppers for clients. And I had a particular client from a royal family, in fact, and she a princess, very lovely young woman, and she has a horrible nut allergy, like like really bad, like has a pen kind of thing, and yeah, so and so a lot of the um, recipes that in this region where they're from calls for a lot of nuts. It's heavily used. So I was constantly kind of coming up with these new ideas to how to replace nuts. And seeds are creatively a great replacement for nuts. And so I kind of came up with this seed topper, and then I thought more about it from a nutritional perspective, and then decided to kind of, you know, work with the recipe to make it a little bit more digestible and scientific. So that's kind of how it evolved. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then And that's something that you saw was going to be beneficial to a wider audience, I guess.
I noticed that I would make these big batches of them, and I noticed that it really enhanced meals and kind of saved me a lot of time as a chef. So, like, I would make a salad and maybe it'd have two or three ingredients, but if I used the seeds, it just made it like really gourmet, like really crunchy and extra delicious, more umami, more. The seeds are the way I've done the recipes are they're very high in umami, so it's kind of like you don't it's almost to the point where you could, just steam some vegetables or saute them in a pan and add the seeds, and then you kind of have a really delicious meal with not a lot of fuss. So yeah, I think it kind of evolved over time into this topping idea. I'm crazy for salads as well, so I think we're all busy. So if you want to make a quick salad, making a salad can be really complex, all that chopping and washing and drying but if you just have time for 10 minutes to make yourself something to eat, you can just pop the seeds on top and it's really satisfying and full of protein.
Yeah. Salads are probably my favorite food as well, so I definitely relate to that. Have you been to Honest Greens?
Yes, I have been to the one in Lisbon. I'm Portuguese. I have a So I have spent a lot of time in Lisbon, and I have a Portuguese passport rather, and I was there a year and a half ago, and I was blown away that it was they something like that had opened there. I really like it.
Think the thing about it is it's not like the most delicious food of all time, but I think it does look like they're making an effort to make it fresh. It's pretty good value when you consider something like Attis or Urban Greens. But
Yeah,
it's also the environment where you get to sit down and have a
yeah,
moment. So I think they do it really well. I think the other
yeah.
salad places have a few things to learn from it.
I agree. It is a really nice environment. It's funny because I thought that this was like a small indie Portuguese brand, but it's really nice to see them growing. That's fantastic, and that they're here because we need more of that. It's kind of like what's the one in America called? Do you know Sweet Greens?
No.
Okay, so Sweet Greens is this. I think it started in New York City, but basically it's a build-a-bowl salad company. But the ingredients are really poor quality, but they're really interesting, right? So you'll have like smoked paprika salmon or like deviled egg or something like that. But it's really lowbrow quality food, but it still makes a delicious salad. And you get these big bowls, and then they shake it up like this, and it's served to you. Very expensive,
Yeah.
but there's nowhere to eat. It's a lineup of people. It's almost like being in a McDonald's in Ohio or something. It's so yeah. It's you know, leveling up salad culture is such a huge market. Yeah,
That is really interesting because when I hear stories like that and I think about the new Marks and Spencer's range that's ultra processed free, although some of the products do actually have ultra processed ingredients in them, I kind of feel like we're moving in the right direction. And even if it's not perfect, maybe it's better than what we had before. But
yeah.
then, but is it greenwashing or something? I'm not really sure about it.
I think what M&S and Tesco is definitely greenwashing, because how could it be that cheap? But I mean, I had a project a few years ago with a client of mine who's still a client. She's lovely, but we wanted to open up one of these sweet green salad bars, and after we did the numbers, it was just crazy, crazy expensive to do it because we wanted to do organic, high quality. So at the end of the day, your salad would end up costing you like 40 pounds or something, right? Because the cost of these high quality little ingredients that you put in your food at home, that you would serve it's just not possible at this. So we have a long way to go, you know.
Yeah.
It's great to eat a nice salad at a place like that, but the quality is not going to be anywhere near you if you went to the fresh market or Whole Foods or whatever and made it at home. But at least salads are out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think the cost discussion is really interesting because I think we've commoditized food to the point where the price is the most important thing, and we
Yeah.
don't really think about that it could be a benefit. The way that I like to think of it is if you shave your costs down as far as possible when it comes to the food you eat now, you're going to end up spending more on medicines and medical health care in the future.
100%. It's preventative healthcare. So that's why nutritional therapy is such an important profession because you're basically saving a lot of pain off your life towards the end of it, right? And those can be really nice years of your life as well. So if you can manage to, but the problem is, food is so commodity. It's just such a hard thing for everyday people to understand that the quality is so important, because it's just cheaper. They can't, even if they knew the real story behind the food, people just can't afford high quality food. It's not, especially in the state of our country at the moment. I mean, things are just so expensive that, if you can save, a few pounds on your meat or your fish, you're going to do it.
Yeah. But I kind of think there are options to not increase your costs, but maybe you have to move from steak to beans or chickpeas or something.
Totally. And I always say that to my clients and to anybody. I mean, also we don't need to be eating meat every day. I mean, who does that? You eat meat, eat really high quality meat once a week, really high quality fish, seasonal, particularly fish, and you know, you're good. Beans are so delicious. Seeds are amazing. Nuts. I mean, there's so many things that you can pack your meals with and get plenty of protein without having to eat, you know, animals.
Yeah.
It's
What does Ayurveda have to say about it? Do they have a particular way of looking at your diet?
Well, Ayurveda is more based around your doshas. So we have three main doshas, um, and that we're born with, and that kind of to parallel it with modern medicine or naturopathy. It's again very based on family history, DNA, stuff like that. So you inherit a lot. It depends on what time of year you were born, what season you were born. But you have natural characteristics that you're born with, and so the foods that you need to eat cater to that dosha. And when that dosha goes out of balance, you can balance it by eating the foods to put the dosha back into balance. That dosha back into balance. Uh,
Okay. I think I run quite hot. I think I'm Vata. Is that right?
yeah. So yeah, you just looking at you because it's very physical as well. So you could probably like a Vata Pitta or a Pitta Vata. Usually you're two. You're
Okay.
very
Yeah, that
very
sounds right.
yeah. So you would probably be a Vata Pitta.
So
Um,
what does that mean when you say looking at you, you can tell?
well, Pitta people tend to be very, very detailed, for example. They're very particular and very focused. And, um, Vata people tend to be, Vata and Pitta are similar. And they tend to be lighter build and leaner built. And where Kapha tend to be more of a larger build or very thick, glossy hair, big eyes, big, nice skin, but they tend to be larger physically. But that's not always the case. You could have a dosha that's out of balance and become very kapha, even though you're not naturally a kapha. So, for example, if you were a Vata Pitta and you were eating only ultra processed foods, your kapha would go way out of balance and you'd become very, maybe even obese, right? So it's really all about balancing and eating in season. So you would have kapha foods, for example, in winter because they're warming, nourishing, but you wouldn't have, beef stew in July, right? That's like a very kapha dish because it's hot. You need cooling foods like salads, cucumbers, hydrating. Um, but it's a very deep subject. I mean, it's fascinating. People are study it for many years. It's really interesting.
Yeah. It sounds like you've really, or they've really simplified it by saying that you're three types and to sort of summarize a whole diet with just three types sounds like it's
No, it's much deeper than I'm just trying to summarize it for you. Otherwise, we
yeah,
would
yeah.
have
Okay.
forever. But you
Yeah.
have sub-doshas, you have dhatus, you have it goes into quite a deep system um, for your diet and health. But generally speaking, you're of the three doshas, you're usually two, and you can kind of get a general idea. But you can have your system quite out of balance and have the symptoms of another dosha, right?
Right. Titania, but just to wrap up, can I ask what is your favorite of your Vitality Seed crunches?
So I have only three flavors right now. My plans are to develop two more. Um, the one I've just developed, I have barbecue, which being American, I kind of wanted to start with something like that. And also I wanted to work with, foods that were really plain. And then if you just put the barbecue on top, you get all this flavor. So it's like two ingredients and you have a delicious dish. But then after eating so many barbecue seeds, I realized that barbecue doesn't really go with everything. And actually, not everybody likes barbecue. So I developed garlic, which is kind of a more neutral flavor, and it can go on Asian, it can go on, Thai, it can go on um, basically anything and really enhance the dish. So right now I'm just like eating loads of it. But I think my next flavor is going to be sort of an Indian inspired one based around Indian salads.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah.
But also, how can you get barbecue flavor and keep it quite natural?
Um, well, I am certified by the Organic Federation, so all of my ingredients are 100% organic, except for the salt, because salt cannot be organic. Um, so yeah, it's just in my secret ingredients, but it definitely is very barbecuey.
Okay, brilliant.
Don't worry.
Titania, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.